Hey guys, I'm JC and today we're playing Ratadrabik of Urborg. This is an Orzhov clone deck with a reanimator sub-theme that aims to make a token army of legendary creatures to defeat its opponents. If you like the deck, make sure to stop by the channel where we have a deck tech as well as other gameplay videos showing how the deck was built as well as how it plays out. Also, in our Discord group, we have a channel dedicated specifically to this commander. Let's see if Ratadrabik's Relentless Horde is enough to get the job done. Okay guys, let's see what our opponents are playing today. We have Slicer Hired Muscle, we have Plarg Dean of Chaos, or possibly Augusta Dean of Order, and finally, we have Venser Corpse Puppet. Okay, a few newer commanders here, which is really good to see. Actually quite excited to play against a Slicer deck. I've heard a lot of rumors about how strong it is and that, so hopefully we'll get to see it today. Now, if we take a look at our opening hand, it's a really good one. Our is just an absolute bomb in this deck. We already have enough lands, we have card draw, we have Ancient Tomb, which basically acts as ramp, and Luminous Broodmoth is going to hopefully help us recur some of our creatures. Not necessarily our, but we should be able to recur something good, even if it does end up being the Midnight Reaper, so we'll keep this. Plarg starts the game by playing a fetch land for turn. They crack it right away. They put a shock land into play, but they have it come into play tapped. And then they pass the turn. Venser plays a shock land for turn, but they just have it come into play tapped. And then they also pass the turn. We draw a Gonti for turn. Well, hopefully we find something pretty juicy from that. Let's not scare our opponents with our Ancient Tomb just yet. I think we'll just play our Caves of Koilos, and then we'll pass it over. Slicer plays a land for turn. Next, they cast a Jeweled Lotus. Well, it looks like we've got a turn 1 Slicer on our hands here, and we may just get to see how powerful this commander can be this game. And I'm not sure why the Slicer player didn't actually cast their commander there. Let me go check chat. So I just checked chat, and it seems that the Jeweled Lotus is actually bugged at the moment, so that's a real big shame for Slicer. Now, Plarg does start by playing a land for turn. And now they cast their commander, Plarg Dean of Chaos. Tap, discard a card, draw a card, and then pay 5 tap. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary non-land card with mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, but all revealed cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. And that is it for them. Venser plays an Urborg for turn. Well, that's really good for us. Making all the land swamps is going to really help with our Ancient Tomb. And now Venser casts their commander, Venser Corpse Puppet. It has lifelink Toxic 1, and whenever you proliferate, choose one. If you don't control a creature named the Hollow Sentinel, create the Hollow Sentinel, a legendary 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Golem artifact creature token. And also target artifact creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. And that is going to be it for them. We draw a Felwar Stone for turn. Let's just start by playing our Plains for turn. And then we'll cast our Felwar Stone. From here, we'll just pass it over. Slicer plays a land for turn. Now they cast an Iron Mirror. But that is going to be it for them. Plarg plays a land. Now they start by activating their commander's ability. So they're going to discard a card and then draw. And it looks like they discard a Dragon's Approach. So we've got a Dragon's Approach deck on our hands. Something we will have to keep our eye on in a deck that plans on paying life, as we see by the Ancient Tomb in our hand. Next, they also cast Sarkhan Fireblood. +1, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. Its other +1 is add 2 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast dragon spells. And its -7 is create 4 5/5 red dragon creature tokens with flying. Now they uptick Sarkhan using its discard and draw ability. We'll probably see another Dragon's Approach hit the graveyard. And we do. So they may be opting here to actually try and exile the 5 Dragon's Approaches and get a dragon onto the battlefield ASAP. And that is going to be it for them. Venser starts by casting a Sol Ring. And next they cast a Tezzeret's Gambit. Draw 2 cards, then proliferate. Proliferating triggers their commander's ability, so they're going to make the Hollow Sentinel now. And there we see it with that beautiful art. Now they move to combat. Let's see who they swing at. They send Venser towards the Planeswalker. So we like to see that. They can help take the Planeswalker out, as well as stop us from getting some toxic counters. Or some poison, technically. And that is it for them. We draw a land for turn. So I think this turn our play will actually be to get our Owl down, because Slicer is very likely to come down next turn. And if we do get that down, it not only makes a great blocker, which will trade with Slicer, but we also get some great value off of its death trigger. So let's do that. We'll play our Ancient Tomb for turn. And let's cast Owl. And from here, we'll just pass it over. And for some reason there, we've had one of the players concede. I didn't see anything in chat to indicate why they actually left, so that's a little bit of a shame. Now Slicer does play an Inventor's Fair for turn, so they can eventually use it to tutor up an artifact, which will no doubt make Slicer a bigger boy, doing a lot more damage. And now they cast the flip side of their commander, Slicer High Speed Antagonist. It has Living Metal, First Strike and Haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, convert it at end of combat. Well, they will have an open opponent with the Plarg player, so no doubt it goes that way. And it does. Damage goes through, that triggers Slicer. So now it will convert. And that is it for the Slicer player. On Plarg's upkeep, Slicer does trigger. So now the Plarg player will have to attack with Slicer, and because we're the only opponent left, it's definitely going to be coming our way. So that other player conceding might actually affect the outcome of this game pretty significantly. Now Plarg does play a land for turn, and then they activate their commander straight away, discarding and drawing. Now they activate their Sarkhan, doing the same thing, discarding a card and then drawing again. So now they have a total of 4 Dragon's Approaches in their graveyard. And now they finally cast the 5th one. It deals 3 damage to each opponent. You may exile Dragon's Approach and 4 cards named Dragon's Approach from your graveyard. If you do, search your library for a dragon creature card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Alright, well let's see what's the worst dragon they can pull out at the moment. And they find themselves an Ancient Copper Dragon. A flyer that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20, you create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Probably one of my favourite dragons of all time. Very, very powerful, and a lot of fun to roll the d20 as well. After that, they move straight to combat, and as we mentioned, Slicer has to swing in towards us. I'm actually going to let this damage through just for this combat because I want to get the maximum value from having our commander down. And I don't think our opponents are going to expect just how much value we can get off our owl. So let's take the 6 damage. And that is it for the Plarg player's turn. At the beginning of our upkeep, Slicer triggers. We draw a Nykthos for turn. Not a bad draw at all, but we do want more access to black mana, and especially because the other player that conceded who had that Urborg isn't here anymore. Unfortunately, I think we'll have to hold on to Nykthos just at the moment, so we'll start by playing our Scrubland. And now we'll cast our commander. I am actually going to use the Ancient Tomb here, because I want to be able to hold up our Takenuma. The really fun thing with Ratadrabik as well is if somehow Slicer does die while it's under our control, we'll actually make a token copy of it. So now we will move to combat. We have to swing Slicer Plarg's way. Highly doubtful they actually block here. And they don't. That knocks them down to 30. And now we're just going to pass the turn. On Slicer's upkeep, Inventor's Fair triggers, so they'll gain a life. Next, they play a land for turn. Now they move to combat. Slicer goes towards the Plarg player. Now in response, they cast a Brute Force targeting their Slicer. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Alright, that's going to be a lot of damage going towards the Plarg player. And they're going to be taking all of it. And now the Slicer player casts a Blood Moon. Non-basic lands are mountains. Alright, well that's a pretty devastating card for us. We only really have our planes online now, unfortunately. And now it moves to our turn. At the beginning of our upkeep, Slicer triggers. But they don't give it to us, and instead it does convert. We also draw an Emeria's Call for turn. So we'll start by playing our Emeria's Call. We won't have to pay the 3 life because it enters as a mountain. Now we will move to combat. Swing out towards the Slicer player because it does have Vigilance. So it's a free attack anyway. And then we're going to pass the turn. So with this Blood Moon out, the game has certainly gotten interesting now. Slicer starts by playing a mountain for turn. Now they move to combat. They decide to pass straight through combat. Our doing a very good job here. And that is it for their turn. Alright, well it looks like top deck mode for both of us. Let's see who can get the better draws first. We draw a Swamp for turn. That's really nice to see. That puts us online now. So let's cast our Midnight Reaper. Now we'll move to combat. We're going to swing with Owl and our Commander. Both have Vigilance. And really showing the power of that keyword here. Especially when the game gets grindy and it comes down to combat. No blocks are declared. That knocks them down to 25. And then we're going to pass it over. One important thing to note is their Blood Moon is currently shutting off their Inventor's Fair, which they would be able to activate at the moment to go tutor for some artifact, which could actually be our undoing. So as much as Blood Moon is hurting us, it is also partly limiting the Slicer player. Now they cast a Sword of Hearth and Home. A quick creature gets +2/+2 and unfortunately has protection from green and white. Whenever a quick creature deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then search your library for a basic land card, put both cards onto the battlefield under your control, and then shuffle. Now they move to equip their Sword 2 Slicer. They play a land for turn, a Plaza of Heroes. They do swing in with their commander. We are going to block with our Midnight Reaper because we want to draw into some answers. Our Midnight Reaper dies, so we will lose a life and draw a card. And we just get ourselves a mountain. And that is it for their turn. All right, let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's get a good top deck here. And we just get ourselves an Urborg or another mountain. Unfortunately, the little bit of a land flood here is starting to hurt us a bit. So let's play our Urborg for turn. Now we do have our Takenuma held up where we can actually mill some cards and return something to our hand. So unfortunately, we didn't have access to one more black source of mana, or we would have been able to return our Midnight Reaper at the very least and be able to recast it. So I think we just go to combat now. We'll swing in with both creatures. They don't block. We knock them down to 17. And then we'll just pass the turn and hold up our Takenuma. Slicer starts by equipping their Sword of Hearth and Home to their commander. Now they move to combat. We're not going to be able to block, so we'll have to take the damage. Let's just hope they don't have an instant speed trick here, because we may be dead with 6 commander damage already. It looks like they don't. They knock us down to 21. That triggers Slicer as well as Sword of Hearth and Home. They find themselves a land which they put into play. Now Slicer flips over. And after that they cast a Lodestone Golem. Non-artifact spells cost 1 more to cast. Well, at this point in time it doesn't really matter for us, because we have access to all the mana we need at the moment, just not the right colours. Now they move to their end step. Well, this Takenuma is probably going to be the make or break for us. So let's channel it now. And unfortunately, we only really hit a Mangara, the Diplomat, which isn't going to be really helpful for us here at the moment. So I think we get back our Midnight Reaper. So not a great hit. So I think now we're just going to have to really hope on our draw step being good. Now we do draw an Ornithopter of Paradise, which means we can actually use it as a blocker. We just have to hope that our opponent can't actually remove it before that's the case, but it is colorless and it does actually give us access to mana as well. So it's definitely not the best draw we could have had, but it's not the worst either. So let's start by casting our Ornithopter now. And then we'll also cast our Midnight Reaper. We're going to move to combat. This time we'll only send in Owl. And then we're going to pass it over. Now Slicer starts by casting a Blasphemous Act. Well, that's actually quite interesting. We've been hoping that our Owl was actually going to die, so they might be helping us here. Alright, well we're going to let that through because we're also going to draw quite a few cards off Midnight Reaper. It's a card that I just currently swapped back into the deck, and now I'm really happy that I did. So we'll allow that to go through. We're going to return our commander to the command zone. We have a good amount of triggers that go on the stack. We're going to look at the top 7 with Owl's trigger. And now let's draw some cards. Just another basic would be really nice to see, a Swamp in particular. So we get a Godless Shrine, a Drivnod. I really like that card. A Smothering Tithe. Not that useful at the moment. And an Agadeem's Awakening. Let's see what our Owl can get us. Alright, so we've actually got quite a number of good hits here. And as sad as it is to say, I think we have to go for our Relic of Legends here, just because our mana fixing is so important at the moment. Though a lot of those cards were really spicy hits. Would have been really nice to have at least gotten one sack outlet there. Now Ratadrabik does trigger. We get a 2/2 Owl. Now Slicer plays a land for turn. And then they recast their commander. Fortunately, they can't equip the sword to it. Now they do move to combat. Do they swing in here? It's going to be quite dangerous if they do, and thankfully they do. Okay, well I don't think they realise what a mistake they could have potentially made here. We're going to block Slicer. Owl does go down. We're going to look at the top 7. And unfortunately, another pretty bad hit here. Owl usually does hit pretty big for me in other games, but this one here not so much. So we're only going to put Kambal into play. And that is going to be it for the Slicer player. We draw a Douthie Voidwalker for turn. So let's start by recasting our commander. Next, we'll actually cast Gonti, because it's going to make a really good blocker and hopefully get us some card advantage. We might find something really good off the Slicer's deck. That triggers Gonti's ETB. Let's see what we find. So we find ourselves a Witch's Clinic, which we can't play lands. We do get a Mind Stone, a Mox Opal, and Rogue's Gloves. Well, the Mox Opal is going to help us with our mana, so I think we're going to take that. Let's cast that for turn. We won't forget to play our land for turn. And then we'll just cast our Douthie Voidwalker. And that is going to be it for us. So despite our relatively bad draws and pretty poor hits off of Owl, we may still have a chance here. We can't block with Douthie, so it all comes down to whether they can actually remove the Gonti or not. So let's see what the Slicer player has for us. Now they start by playing a land for turn. Next they equip their Sword of Hearth and Home to Slicer. They move to combat. They swing in. We're going to block with Gonti. So good news for us, it looks like the block is going to happen. And thanks to our beautiful Ratadrabik, he is going to give us another token copy. So we'll get that ETB effect again. Hopefully find something else useful. All right, and we get a couple of lands, a mana vault, which isn't all that useful at the moment. And Umezawa's Jitte may be useful, so we'll take that. And that is it for the Slicer player. We draw a Tymna for turn. All right, well, there is some potential card draw. I think the game is starting to swing around in our favor here. So what I think I'll actually do now is use our Agadeem's Awakening and return a big bunch of our creatures from the graveyard. So we're going to choose Owl, we'll choose Gonti, and our Midnight Reaper. We'll make sure to tap for our black mana. That resolves. We have a Gonti trigger, an Arcane Signet Mountain, a Sticky Fingers, and a Thorn of Amethyst. Well, I think we'll take the Arcane Signet. Next, we'll play our land for turn. Now we'll play our Drivnod. We'll tap down Owl, as well as Kambal. So now when any of our legendary creatures die, we're going to get extra token copies. Now we'll move to combat. We'll swing in with our Commander, as well as our Gonti token, because it has Vigilance. Damage goes through. And really now, the mono-red player is going to need a very specific answer to be able to handle what we're doing. And I think in their colors, it's going to be pretty hard. So let's just pass it over to them and see what they've got for us. Otherwise, I think we take the game. All right, so they're tapping down their artifacts. So they may be convoking something here. Maybe I've gotten a little too confident. I honestly just don't know what in their colors they could have that could get it done, unless their equipment actually lets them go through here. Now they do cast a Saheeli's Directive for X equals 6. Reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of artifact cards with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard. That triggers our Kambal, so they are going to lose 2 life, we'll gain 2. Alright, well I think for them this is it. They have to find something like a Sword of Feast and Famine to really be able to take us out here. But even then, it doesn't look like they have the mana to be able to equip both swords. So I'm not too sure what they could have here. Right, it looks like they get themselves a Reaver Cleaver. They get a Fire Diamond, a Sword of Forge and Frontier. Really great new card. And it looks like they scoop it up there. Alright guys, well that was a tough game, but let's go to the review and discuss what happened. Well, that was a really tight game that came down to which player top decked better. Now, I know this game would have been vastly different if that Jeweled Lotus hadn't been bugged, but because we don't run any fast mana, I just looked at it as leveling the playing field. But Slicer truly was a force to be reckoned with. It took one player out very early in the game, and when it became a 1v1, it really kept the pressure up. Luckily, part of Ratadrabik's strength is its resilience as the game moves on, and as our creatures died and were replaced by token copies, it eventually gave us the value that we needed to beat our opponent. Well, that's it for today's video. Although this game quickly became a 1v1, it was a great demonstration of why even when you come up against strong hate pieces like Blood Moon, playing on may just produce a game result that is quite memorable. Until next time, guys.